It is time now for the Scramble Podcast alongside my podcast partner, Chris Flynn. I am Paul Hollingsworth. This week we're joined by Dave McCarthy from, well, Dave, I was going to list off your job, but I guess it should be jobs, plural, NHL.com, NHL Network Radio, SiriusXM. I hear you on the Bell Media platforms talking Leafs, etc. You're kind of a man of many hats as you wear a hat today on our podcast, aren't you?
Hey, it's my brand, right, Paul? You got to keep it going. And look, when you hear people in Carolina, my good buddy Mike Solarte the other day, he tweeted a picture of himself with a hat. He said, "I've channeled my inner Dave McCarthy." I guess my brand is stretching far and wide, so we'll live with it.
That is awesome. Look, we're thrilled you took a few minutes for us this week. Just to let our listeners and viewers know, the last time I saw you, Dave, in person, you and I did NHL July 1st Free Agent Frenzy Day, and I believe that was the day they signed John Tavares.
Yes.
I believe so. We were hunkered down in the Ford Performance Center or whatever that rink is called. So we've been on the road together. We've traveled around together. We've done the same beat together off and on over the years, and we have a litany of friends in common too.
That's exactly it. No, I think you're absolutely right. That was probably the last time. It was fun. I was thinking to myself the other day, it's been a long time since I've talked to Paul, so it was really good to hear from you. And I guess, I don't know, I remember back to the days when we were doing Jays in 14 and 15 there, when that was kind of the buzz, and some good memories back in the day, though I don't know if the Blue Jays are going to take care of us this year. They're having a little trouble hitting with runners in scoring position.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I said before the season, a quick blurb on baseball, my lofty prediction was all 5 teams in the AL East would finish 500 or above. I'm sticking with that. I did not predict the Blue Jays, while being above 500, would be the 5th place team. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Erratically inconsistent. Looked like world beaters against the Braves, and they got caved in by the Yankees. And it's continued to go on, and now they're in tough against Tampa Bay. So, but listen, let's get to hockey right away. All kinds of drama happening in the Big Smoke. Kyle Dubas, Brendan Shanahan, the marriage is over. The Leafs are without a general manager. Kyle Dubas, after a clunky and somewhat different sort of press conference last Monday, was followed up by some heavy drama from Brendan Shanahan on Friday, which basically he ran through the whole scenario leading into his decision to let Kyle Dubas go. Allow you to repeat some themes that maybe everybody knows about, but at the same time, bring us up to speed where it is now, and what's your take on what is A, a developing story, and B, a story that was really, we did not see it coming.
No, we didn't. I mean, look, Paul, you've been in the business a long time. You know how it is. You go into a lot of press conferences with more or less of an idea of what's going to get said, right? And very rarely, because we're around it all the time. You're there day in, day out. You kind of have an idea of what the themes are and where the narrative is going and the relationships behind the scenes and all of that. You generally have an idea of what you're expecting to hear when you go into a press conference. And a year ago at this time, when we went into the season-ending presser, what got said was not much. Essentially, they're running it back, and we all left and thought, yeah, that's kind of what I thought was going to be said. I was shocked in a way that I have not been very often in this business when I left Kyle Dubas' press conference a couple of Mondays ago. To hear him say what he had to say, where he said he wasn't sure if he wanted to be the general manager of the Leafs anymore. And for a lot of people, it's you think to yourself, who would be in the position where they could, one, make that decision, and then two, would even think for a second that the answer to that question may be anything other than, well, of course I want to continue to be the general manager of the Maple Leafs. So that really threw a lot of us for a loop. And then it was my compunction at the time, and I said it the day after, that, man, my thought process on him coming back, probably, if I had to bet, less than 30% at this point. And it turns out I was right, but not in the way that I thought I was going to be right, because my thought process was that it really was a difficult year on his family, and that it really took a toll on him personally, and then he might need a year to recharge, which is completely fair. completely fair. But it turned out that he wanted to return based on what Brendan Shanahan had to say, and that he ended up getting let go, not himself choosing to leave. Very different part of the equation there, based on a breakdown in negotiations for a new contract. So that was stunning. And then last Friday, when Brendan Shanahan laid out, when you have a meeting, the minutes of a meeting, like that level of detail as to how when he wasn't even prompted, it was his brief opening statement that lasted 11 minutes where he went point by point, which was in and of itself shocking. So to be where we are right now, compared to where we were on April 30th when they finally won a round for the first time in 19 years, to me is shocking. I don't think anybody would have thought that we would have been in this position.
And Chris, were you under the impression that Kyle Dubas would come back? I mean, you and I have talked a lot about the Leafs on our podcast over the past couple of months. Were you shocked, or did you think maybe Dubas could have been in trouble?
I thought he was going to come back, but like Dave said on Monday when he said, well, I'm not sure I want to come back, and maybe people feel that way, but they don't tell their potential bosses that. And even Brendan Shanahan said that. He said, I respect and appreciate those feelings. He goes, I didn't think he was going to say that out publicly to the public. Like Brendan said about Kyle saying that out publicly, he was surprised. And I think that got Brendan thinking a little differently too throughout the week. Like, geez, maybe do I really want Kyle back if he's not 100% sure he wants to be back? And then I guess the contract that was sent to Brendan as well, maybe was asking for, I'm not sure if it was more money, but whatever, asking for different options on the contract. And then Brendan, as that week went on, just kept questioning whether he really did want Kyle back. So and I've never seen a press conference like that where the guy goes in such detail, like you said, Dave, without even being prompted. Brendan, about how the whole week transpired. So yeah, it was a little bit surprising, but on that Monday when Kyle said he wasn't sure he wanted the job, that might have been the beginning of the end, Kyle's press conference.
Well, yeah, and Dave, I want to pick up on that. I'll make a very flimsy comparison from Kyle Dubas to my life. In 4 days, I'm in an airplane flying to Toronto to Anchor Sports Center for the weekend. If I told my TSN bosses, I don't know if I want to do that, guess what? They wouldn't finish a sentence for me, and they'd say, great, you're off the list. That's kind of how it goes in the real world.
Right.
Before we get into any attempt for Kyle Dubas to ask for money and for Kyle Dubas to maybe grab some more power at MLSE, how lacking of terra firma was he on? Because when you signal that you no longer for sure want to be the GM of one of the top 3 flagship franchises in the NHL, Montreal and New York Rangers being the other two, you probably don't get a chance to finish a sentence in some markets. Is that a fair way of putting this?
Oh, I think you're both absolutely right. And I think, as Brendan made sure to point out in his remarks, that Kyle spoke on Monday against what I recommended. Brendan said that I told him I wasn't going to do media on Monday and that I don't think you should either until we get our business taken care of. But he said he wanted to do it. So that was fine. He went ahead and did it. But he made sure and clear to point out that was against Brendan's recommendation to do media on Monday. And then to come out as Kyle did and suggest what he suggested. I like what you said, Paul, like the real world, right? When you give your bosses an indication that you may not really be fully invested in this, it's going to let people think, right? And then it lets them go down a road of thinking, well, maybe we should go in a different direction. So one, I don't think he liked that he talked to the media, regardless of what he said on Monday. Then in saying what he said, which Brendan suggested behind closed doors Kyle had shared with him on the weekend prior to Monday, but that he actually came out and said it to the public. Brendan said, I did not expect him to make that public. That did not sit well. And what I think it was perceived as, from Brendan Shanahan's standpoint, ownership standpoint, was an attempt to garner public sentiment in his favor. Which when you're negotiating with companies the likes of Bell and Rogers, like they don't like their business being dealt with in public. They like it done behind closed doors, as we're all well aware. So there's that. And then on Wednesday, he said they had a long meeting, seemed like they were relatively on the same page. And I think from Brendan's standpoint, felt as though they had more or less come to an agreement. So you think you've got everything settled. He was waiting for a response from Kyle just to say, yep, 100% in, let's go. And then what he gets is, and look, we've only really heard one side of the story, Brendan Shanahan's and the Maple Leafs. We really haven't heard Kyle. He didn't go into it in his statement today. But what Brendan Shanahan said, you get a new financial framework. In other words, a brand new offer that was totally out of the realm of what had been discussed. That's not going to sit well either when you think you have a deal and then it changes seismically. So all of those things, you poke the bear often enough, you're going to find out what happens. And Kyle Dubas found out if he wanted to return, that may well be so. But I think he overestimated his position within the company, and he got burned. Now I think he'll get another job. I think he's still really well in demand. But if he truly wanted to remain with the Maple Leafs, I do think to an extent, as you said, Paul, in the real world, I think he overplayed his hand a little bit.
I find in Toronto, through the prism of the media and the fan base, and I say this respectfully, things do get a little overstated. Kyle Dubas inherited that team coming off a 105-point season. If you prorate the two shortened COVID seasons based on an 82-game schedule, and you prorate those to a point total, he averaged 106 points in his seasons with the Maple Leafs. So they did not climb up the ladder demonstrably. If we're looking at leaving the team better or worse than from when he came there, can I say the contract of John Tavares and what that's done to the payroll structure of the team puts them in better situation than they were when they had, say, Nazem Kadri in the team? I can't definitively say that. I have questions about how the roster was handled and how the payroll in a salary cap world was managed. So this is a long way getting to the question. Based on his record, how good of a general manager is he? I would submit to you, Dave, that I've heard a bit of an overstatement on his success level for the past week, but I've heard people who I respect enormously say he's a fantastic general manager, but I personally can't come to conclusions on his record.
No, and I think you're right in putting it that way, Paul, because yes, he did inherit an unbelievable core, a core the likes of which is difficult to come upon. So he walked into that situation, and look, that's fine. That was the position he found himself in. Brian Burke walked into a pretty damn good position in Anaheim with the Ducks all those years ago. He went out and he acquired Chris Pronger, which was a brilliant move at the time, and it put them over the edge. But, Brian would be the first to say that he walked into a pretty good situation. He made a couple of moves around the edges that helped push it over the edge, and he got all the credit for it. And great. He won a Stanley Cup. He held a parade. He deserves credit, and he gets it. Now, in Kyle Dubas's situation, look, he didn't worsen the team. It's not like he took over and they fell completely off the map and they missed the playoffs a couple of years or anything like that. They were an all-time regular season team, like year in, year out, really, really good in the regular season. Couldn't get it done in the playoffs. So, look, he didn't lose his job based on the body of work. When you listen to what Brandon Shanahan had to say, he lost his job because there was a breakdown in the relationship based on the negotiations. But it wouldn't be unfair that after 5 years as general manager, where when he came into this situation, the expectations were already high, as they were for each of the following 5 years, and they only won one playoff round, it wouldn't be unfair to suggest that maybe it is time for a different set of eyes on the situation to see if maybe they've fallen in. Like, you fall into habits, right? When you're in charge of something, you think your way is the only way of doing it, and this will be the way that works, and you'll start to lose perspective to an extent. Someone else will come in and say, look, well, I like what we're doing here and there, and that's good. But this guy over here taking up 20 minutes a night and that sort of philosophy over there that has us playing out, that's no good. That's got to change. So maybe a fresh set of eyes will bring new perspective on what still is a really good team. So I guess what I would say is that Kyle was a good manager here in Toronto. I think he built a lot of things off the ice that I think there's a lot of merit to. I think the culture that he installed, the way he treated people, really, really good stuff and progressive in the way that we need to move toward in society nowadays. But the fact of the matter is the results on the ice, I don't think you could unreasonably suggest have been disappointing throughout his 5 years. To win one playoff round over that time, the expectations were a lot higher than that. So I don't think he was a bad manager by any stretch. I think he was a good manager. But I also think after this amount of time where the results were where they were, that also maybe a fresh set of eyes and a new perspective, it might be time for that as well.
Yeah, there's already
go ahead, Christian.
Yes, there's already a few teams apparently showing interest in Dubas. I think Pittsburgh, right? He's might be getting interview with Pittsburgh, and I even heard Ottawa Senators potentially could be a landing spot if things, depending on ownership and everything like that. I didn't know this till this week, but I guess Dubas was an Ottawa Senators fan growing up, so that's what I'm hearing in the Ottawa area. Little hints about maybe him going to Ottawa, things depending on ownership and all that stuff. So that's kind of interesting.
Well, I'm always suspicious when I hear somebody say they were a fan of a team. You know, Michael Camilleri grew up in Toronto, and the day he signed with the Montreal Canadiens, he announced to the world he was a Habs fan. I was glad he signed in Montreal, but I never believed it. So that's it. I always get a kick with those things. Listen, and Chris is right. It will be a real interesting drama to see where Kyle Dubas goes next, and he certainly will land someplace. If I had to bet safe money, I'd say it looks like he's going to Pittsburgh. Let's touch on Austin Matthews briefly. And as I ask you about Austin Matthews, I'll preface with a bit of context or subtext. I Googled today John Tavares, his last year in New York. He made numerous comments about, this is my home, this is where I grew up, I don't want to leave here. He went on the record as late as February saying he wanted to stay and this is where he wanted to be. And the other two pieces of context, subtext, will be two American players last year in similar situations, Johnny Gaudreau and Tkachuk in Calgary, both left and basically, were asked to leave the city, and they were sent. One signed and one was traded. I have a suspicion when it comes to American players signing long-term contracts in the U.S., in Canada, until I believe it when I see it. And I don't necessarily buy what they're selling when a player says, this is where I want to stay. Do you see Austin Matthews staying in Toronto? Do you think there's a possibility he says, I'm not going to sign long-term, so they have to trade him? Or do we go past July 1st where he becomes a non-tradable entity, but in his final year in Toronto with all kinds of drama and question marks around that?
Well, it's not an ideal situation. I will say that much. And I think of the areas that Kyle Dubas aired most during his tenure as general manager, it would have been in the handling of the William Nylander, the Mitchell Marner, and the Austin Matthews contract. I don't think he did a good job really on any one of those deals. It was set with William Nylander where he caved at the last minute. William got everything he wanted and was made whole for the time that he sat out that year. That set an horrendous precedent moving forward. Then Austin Matthews, you knew was going to get the money that he wanted. Like, it wasn't going to be much of a negotiation, but the term became an issue. Not 8, as had become the norm leading up to that, right? Leon Draisaitl signed 8 without thinking. Connor McDavid signed 8 without thinking. Austin Matthews signs 8. No, he signs 5 without thinking. Walks him right to free agency, and in the final year of that deal, they gift him a no-move clause, which essentially renders him an unrestricted free agent after 4. Yeah. Austin Matthews has all of the control right now right now. And then just to finish that point, once those two deals were set, Mitch Marner said, well, I've actually led your team in scoring the past couple of years. So they got everything they wanted. You're not playing hardball with me. And they didn't. They bowed down, and he got too much money at the time. Great player, but not $11 million coming out of entry level. And that tied their hands to an extent with the salary cap where it was. So that didn't help the team. You mentioned the John Tavares contract earlier. That was, you can argue it. Was it necessary at the time? Look, John's been productive. He's been a point-a-game guy. He's been good, but man, $11 million. Could you have spent that money elsewhere and been fine with Nazem Kadri? Maybe. Kadri and other issues, suspensions, we don't need to get into that. But anyway, my point being, I don't think he handled his contracts very well. So now here's where we find ourselves. Austin Matthews is essentially an unrestricted free agent right now. They need to trade him by July the 1st if they want to be able to trade him wherever they want to trade him. But you're running that risk because he cannot sign until July 1st. So, you could trade him. You could turn around and say, well, what are you doing? I was going to sign with you. Oh, no. Maybe, right? But if you get past July 1st, when now you're taking him at his word, which he said last Monday, and a lot's transpired, guys, since I last talked to the man. Kyle Dubas hadn't spoken yet. Brandon Shanahan hadn't spoken yet. Kyle Dubas hadn't yet lost his job. So the last time I spoke to the man, he said that his intention is to return to Toronto, that he wants to be in Toronto long term. What I think that means is I am going to get the money that I'm going to get, but I'm willing to take it from you. That's to me what that means, because it's not going to be a negotiation. Austin Matthews is going to get his money. He's willing to take it from Toronto. But the question now becomes, well, what money is that? What money do you think you're going to get? Because he's going to get it from somewhere. Yeah. If it's to push the bar past Nathan McKinnon, who's at 12.6 right now, make it 12.8, maybe 13. Okay, I can live with that. Because, I'm not thrilled with it because I don't think he's the best player in the game. But, he shoots at the net 40 times a year automatically. He's won the Hart Trophy, Maurice Richard, all that. He's a good player. He can command that type of money. If he wants like a max deal where we're talking high 14s, 15, like now I really got to think, is he $2.5 million better than the highest paid player in the league at this point? I don't know if he is. He can command it. He'll probably get it from some team, but can you really build a sustainable championship caliber team around a guy with a price tag like that? I don't know. I don't know if you can. So now they're in this fuzzy part where he can't sign until July 1st. You got to take him at his word. You got to try and figure out if you've got a deal in place or if you can make a deal. Otherwise, you got to roll the dice and trade him ahead of time. Otherwise, he can Matthew Tkachuk the whole situation after July 1st and say, well, I'm not coming back, just to let you know. So I'm willing to let you trade me, but I'm going to let you trade me to Los Angeles or wherever it might be. And then suddenly your options become extremely limited. So it's not an ideal position to be in. And it comes back to the fact that he was gifted a no move clause the final year of his deal.
And it's and I want one last question on Matthews. And I know Chris is champing at the bit to talk about some of the playoff series. They can't win a trade with Austin Matthews, can they?
No.
They will get multiple. Wherever he goes, Austin Matthews is the best player in any hypothetical deal, correct?
Sure, unless the trade coming back is Nathan McKinnon or Connor McDavid, which it's not going to be, right? No. So, look, if the thing with Matthews is I do think he's a businessman off the ice to an extent as well. And that's the one benefit that Toronto has that, for the purpose of your example, Paul, last year, Calgary does not have. The business of hockey in Toronto is strong. You can make a lot of money off the ice in Toronto in a way that, even though you're in Canada, in Calgary, you can't still make to the same extent. So if Austin Matthews wants to be in a position where he can maximize off the ice, Toronto's a pretty damn good place to be. And if he's willing to take, like I said, 13 from the Leafs, he's doing okay. He's not looking for his next meal. And he'll probably be in a position where, like, I think he would like to contend as well. If he stays and they keep Nylander or Marner, you might have to move on from one, but you continue to restock the system. You've got prospects coming up. You'll end up with cap space once John Tavares moves off the books in a couple of years that you can reinvest in other areas of the team. You'll be able to continue to build this out for another 6 or 7 years. So that's a benefit that Toronto has. But like if he says no, look, he's not going to Arizona. Let's not be foolish here. He's not going to play at the Mullet Arena. It's not happening. But like, let's say he says, "Oh, I want to go play in LA." You trade him to LA. You're not winning that trade. Like there is no Austin Matthews equivalent 6 or 7 years younger that you can throw into that deal, and it's just not happening. So no, you wouldn't win that deal. You might get a number of quality parts, but to lose a player the caliber of Austin Matthews, a 40-goal scorer, automatic every year, and a type of big center, two-way game, those guys don't grow on trees. So no, you won't win that deal. It's a tough deal that you'll have to make, but you'll also have to look long and hard if you can't make a deal because I'll put it this way, and my final point on this is if you trade him, no, you won't win the deal. But I think you'll lose even more if he walks out the door and you get nothing back. Even though you get the cap space back, that's too rich an asset to let walk out the door to get zero in terms of assets back.
It is a fascinating storyline, multiple storyline coming out of Toronto. Before I throw to Chris and we'll talk about some of the playoff series, I will just add this to button down the Leafs talk. When they lost to Washington in 6 games in Matthews' rookie year, I think 2017, I did not grow up a Leafs fan. They're not a team I cheer for. I do not have a rooting interest. And I was certain they were going to win a Stanley Cup in the next several years. And this already has a feel like this thing is being broken down just a little bit heading into next season. It will be fascinating to watch.
I like what you said there because I'm the same way, Paul. In 2017, I thought it was inevitable that they win a Stanley Cup. That they cannot not win a Stanley Cup in the next 5 years. And now I'm at the point where you're starting to see cracks in the hull of the ship. And just as likely as it could be that they can pivot and continue to build out here and remain competitive for 5 or 6 more years, I could also see it going the other direction. And before you know it, Matthews is out the door. And then Nylander says, well, if he's out, I'm out too. And then before you know it, you're back into where we were in 2014, which was not a good place in Toronto.
No, rebuild mode. Chris, I'll throw to you. You've been, like all of us, you've been intrigued by the playoff series. It's been a fun ride so far. We're down to the Final Four.
Well, it's crazy with the Florida series in Carolina. Like Florida went up 3-0 on Toronto. Now here they are up 3-0 on Carolina. They actually remind me of the Tampa Bay Lightning a few years ago when Tampa won the President's Trophy and then they get swept in the first round by Columbus. It was like they were going to fire the coach. It was like devastating, but they hung in there with their coach and their players, and then they went on to win 2 Stanley Cups and play in 3 Stanley Cup finals. And now Florida, who were President Trophy winners last year and got beat out early, now all of a sudden this year, they're kind of doing like Tampa did with a veteran Russian goaltender leading the way and a great captain in Tkachuk, who you can see is a real leader with that team. So I find Florida reminds me of Tampa Bay, maybe not as great of a team as Tampa Bay, but kind of the same idea, being at the top, President's Trophy winner, losing, feeling what that felt like and what they're doing this year. It's amazing. Being up 3-0. I'm actually just taking a quick look at the Vegas game. Vegas is beating Dallas 3-0. So amazingly, that series could go 3-0 too. But all the first 2 games were in overtime. Dallas could easily be up 2-0, but instead Vegas is up 2. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, but Vegas, Florida, 2 teams that are really on a roll. That would be, an interesting final. Although we're not quite there yet, but it's been some very close games. Even Florida's 3 wins were all by 1 goal, right? So Carolina's been a little bit unlucky, but now being down 3-0, it's looking tough for Carolina right now and for Dallas.
Yeah, no, I like that comparison, Chris, because you look at what Florida's doing right now, and somebody asked me this earlier this afternoon, like who's Florida's kingpin skater? And I had to think to myself for a second. It's like, well, I guess Matthew Tkachuk's the answer. I mean, he's scored timely goals. He's that engine. He pulls you into the fight. He has all those little intangibles. He's playing great away from the puck. But it's not like he's going out and scoring 3 points a night like Leon Draisaitl, right?
Right.
He's contributing. He's scoring timely goals. But I don't think there's really an answer to that question. And it reminds me of Tampa Bay very much, because what did they do when they got finally on beyond Columbus and they went on their run? Like as series went on, they won every game 2-1 or 1-0. Yeah. And it wasn't that right. It wasn't that Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov and Steven Stamkos were scoring 3 points a night. One of those guys scored, seemed like every night, but like one of them. Right. And one night it would be the Braden Point night. The other night it would be the Nikita Kucherov night. But they'd win the games 2-1, 1-0. And Andrei Vasilevsky just went, otherworldly good. And you couldn't score on him. And then the way they played as a team it was such a difficult style to play against. It's knock them down, grind them out, heavy hockey, which always rises to the top at this time of the year. And like I hope finally we're past this discussion of, oh geez, maybe you can win a puck possession game, maybe you can win a highlight. No, like it's over with. You cannot. You got to play heavy. You got to play sound defensively. You got to not beat yourself. That's what Florida's doing. You mentioned Dallas. Yeah, they lost the first couple games in overtime. But I thought in game, so what do we, Tuesday? I thought the game on, would have been game Sunday? 2 in the series.
Game two was it Sunday?
Yeah, whatever it was. Game 2 in the series. They days blend together.
Yeah.
But they played great in the third period. They outshot Vegas 16-8. But the score in the third period was 2-2. They gave up 2. Dallas scored 2. But the 2 goals that Dallas gave up, just terrible, unforced, to use a tennis term, unforced errors, were not to take anything away from Vegas, but like they kind of beat themselves. You can't beat yourself at this time of year with unforced errors. That's what happened to Dallas. Florida's not making mistakes like that. They're just not. So you get sometimes it's Nick Cousins, sometimes it's Matthew Tkachuk, sometimes it's Alexander Barkov. Always it's Sergei Bobrovsky, and you put that all together, and it's a winning formula right now. And if I had to bet, Florida's my pick for the Stanley Cup the way it's going right now. And it's hard to believe that all the 2 series could end in sweeps. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you guys, the basketball series, the 2 conference finals, did those both end in sweeps?
One in this, the other one's 3-0. Is it? One's
that's 3-0,
right. 3-0.
Miami's up 3-0, and amazingly, LA got swept by Denver.
Yeah.
Right,
it's a weird year for that.
Yeah. I saw the odds before the conference finals in both leagues began. It was 88,000 to 1 that all 4 would end in sweeps, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that could happen right now.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, and Tampa Bay had that big defenseman, Hedman, and I feel like I never even really heard of him before. Maybe you guys have, but Florida's D there, is it
Brandon Montour? Yeah,
he's been impressive.
He would be a star. He would be a star in Canada. He was playing in Canada. That kid can play.
He's been impressive, and actually you mentioned about a big skater. He can skate too, and he can play a lot of minutes. So he's really come up to the 4-2 during these playoffs as a key guy for Florida.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear Paul Maurice talk about the development and the progression of Brandon Montour throughout the season. He said he was always a guy that could play, but he was always seemingly behind somebody on the depth chart. In Anaheim, it was behind Cam Fowler for a lot of years. He came to Florida, he was behind Aaron Ekblad. But then Ekblad got hurt for a period of time earlier in the year, and he got to elevate into those minutes. And he finally got that opportunity to be the guy in the power play, to be the guy at even strength playing the majority of the tough minutes. And he showed he can handle the minutes, and he's just never given the minutes up. So sometimes it's can you finally get that chance? And sometimes people never get it. And when you do, can you take advantage? And he has. And now I think, Florida, if you want to look at it, to use the Tampa example again, it's Victor Hedman, but let's not forget about the impact that Ryan McDonough had on those teams as well. Yeah. And man, did they miss him not having him in the fold this year. So now you look at Florida. Well, now they've got a Brandon Montour and an Aaron Ekblad. I mean, that's a Hedman McDonough combination that generally speaking, teams that go deep, they've got those 2D that you can pretty well have one of the two on the ice, each for half the game, and they control the way the game goes.
Yep.
And it goes to show too, and we'll wrap up shortly here, but just final thoughts on the series. For all the talk of systems and bottom six and top six, Dave, give me a goalie with a .930 save percentage. Give me Dominic Hasek in 1999, and he'll beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in the conference final, a series that she should not have won. Patrick Waugh, 86 and 93, two Habs teams that probably were not, definitive Stanley Cup calibers. 2 years ago, Vasilevsky and Carey Price on a collision course for the Stanley Cup final, and this year we're seeing it with Bobrovsky. If you stop 93% of those saves, you're going to win most nights, and perhaps in Bobrovsky's case, every night.
The question is, Paul, do you know which goalie that's going to be on any given year? And that's the tough part about goaltending, because, look, I mean, Andre Vasilevsky, not a huge surprise. I think we all know he's pretty good. He didn't look that great this year. Leafs got to him. Like I said, not having McDonough, not having Chernak, like their team was not the same way in front of him. But he's a pretty good goalie. Sergei Bobrovsky, like Bob plays this good, you're going to have to start calling him Robert, to be honest with you. Because, look, it's been a long time since he's played as well as this. He's won 2 Vezina, so it's not like he came off the scrap heap. But since he came to Florida, he had not lived up to the $10 million cap hit. I don't hear too many people complaining about the $10 million cap hit right now, because the way he's playing, like this is, to me, like Jean-Sebastien Giguère is another guy that comes to mind. That's in 03 with the Ducks. He didn't win, but man, the Ducks didn't have business getting out of the first round, and they went all the way to the Cup final that year. And you just watch the games now. A lot of times you watch the game a long time, the puck gets to a certain area with movement happening, that goes in the net. Like, you just don't stop pucks like that. But Bobrovsky's making stops on a consistent, regular basis where 9 times out of 10 they go in the net. I talked to Austin Matthews after game 1, between games 1 and 2, and remember that game, Leafs had a bunch of good chances and they just didn't go in, and you thought, okay, if they keep playing like that, they'll be okay. And he said to me, he's like, yeah, like I got good looks, and 7, 8 out of 10 times those go in the net, so I'm feeling pretty good about my game. Well, guess what? They just never ended up going in the net because Bobrovsky's kept his play at a level that, like, I don't know if you can keep it that high for a long time, but you hope, if you're a team, that if your goalie finds it, he can keep it there for 6 weeks. And, like Bob's maybe 2.5 weeks away from keeping it there. If he keeps it there, probably gets a Stanley Cup to put on his mantelpiece.
He needs 5 more wins to win the Stanley Cup. With that does, it's funny. You start off needing 4 times 4, and that list is getting shorter and shorter. He's checking off the wins like little notches. And it's a remarkable story. They squeeze into the postseason. They barely make the playoffs, and they're on a fast track to be in the Cup final. And like you, Dave, I get a feeling that they just might win the Stanley Cup this year. Listen, we're going to wrap it up there. Dave McCarthy, very grateful you took time for us. I know you're a busy guy. Things are probably dying down a little bit on a game-by-game basis for you in Toronto, but still lots to cover in your world. And we're extremely grateful you took time to join us on our podcast.
It was a thrill to be on with you guys. Anytime, just a call away. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. He is Dave McCarthy. Alongside Chris Flynn, I am Paul Hollingsworth. We thank all of you for watching. We'll see you soon next time here on the Scramble Podcast.